Ready. I might just start with our intro and then hand it off to Carrie. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the State of Entrepreneurship for Women webinar. This is the final webinar in a three-part series around the state of entrepreneurship, and we are so excited to have you. My name is Varsha Kalavar, and I work on the growth team at SecondMuse, and we're so excited to share the results of the 2022 State of Entrepreneurship survey that we've been working on. In 2020, we launched our first State of Entrepreneurship study to highlight the needs of entrepreneurs across the country and better understand their outlook on the economy as a whole. 2 years later, we conducted another iteration of the study, which we are excited to bring out to you all today, that highlights a number of new challenges that entrepreneurs are facing as we head into a recession. A couple of housekeeping things before handing it off to our host for the next hour. Everyone will be muted for the duration of the webinar, but please feel free to put questions in the chat and we'll address them as we go or at the end of the webinar. We'll be recording this session. We'll send you the link to share with anyone else who may be interested to watch and couldn't make it today. With that, I'll hand it over to the amazing Carrie Freeman, Co-CEO at SecondMuse, who will be hosting the panel. All you, Carrie.
Hi, thank you. And thanks to everyone for participating in this. It's great to see so many faces, and I'm really thrilled to be on here with so many great panelists. Just a little bit about myself. I have been focused in some way, shape, or form on gender equality and really specifically on women's initiatives for over 2 decades, whether it was formally my job or some sort of effort that I've done. And early in my career, I had a working tally on how many times I was the only woman or one of the only few women in a handful of men in a room. And I think as we really look into this and dive into it, there's definitely additional complexities and nuances for women entrepreneurs. I think in general, we can look at the challenges that women face in the workplace, but whenever we add in trying to actually run an organization, run an entity, run a business, it becomes even more challenging. And so we'll definitely dive into some of that today. We did another survey on this, so not surprising. We have found some different challenges that are faced by women. We interviewed 275 different entrepreneurs in our latest 2022 entrepreneurship survey, and conducted just informational background surveys with over 1,000 different people. And what we're seeing is, in general, women are seeing the issues that are facing the country and experiencing them, and are quite honestly more concerned, I would say. In looking at it broadly, 77% of entrepreneurs do not think that the US economy is on the right track, up from 69% in 2020. So that's an 8 percentage point increase in people saying, hey, this is not working. The economy is not in good shape. But specifically, whenever we look at it, we see that women and marginalized communities, including people of color, are feeling and being deprioritized as we head into this recession. And so we'll dive into some of that. I do want to acknowledge that both this year and last year, we took a binary approach whenever we looked at gender. We recognize that the gender spectrum is much broader than that, and so we just want to call that out. So in this conversation that we have over the next hour or so, we will be more fluid in our discussions, but the data itself specifically is targeting either the male or female perspective. And so I just want to acknowledge that and recognize that as an organization and as many of us, we recognize that it's a broader spectrum. And I think as we continue to look at data and how we track data over time, it's important for us to acknowledge that as well. So let's hear from our fantastic panelist here. Everyone that is on is doing some level of entrepreneur support and has been leading running organizations. So Samantha, do you want to kick us off and do just a quick intro about yourself?
Is it because my last name starts with A, B?
I don't know why. I just thought it would be fantastic to hear from you first.
Thank you so much. And I'm so honored to be a part of this very important conversation. Greetings to everyone joining us virtually. My name is Samantha Abrams, and I currently serve as the CEO and Managing Director of Walker's Legacy. At Walker's Legacy, we exist to equip, inspire, and best engage Black and Brown women entrepreneurs globally. And we do this through thought leadership, convenings, gatherings, events, and of course, robust programming. My body of work across 2 decades, it's really interesting as I traverse my career journey. All of what I did in corporate America had a through line to all the other organizations and really best equipped me and allowed me to be ready and prepared to step into these roles to help bolster the very important work that I get to be a part of in the nonprofit space. And over the course of the last 8 years, the work that I've been focusing on specifically is around civil rights and social justice in some form. And today, at Walker's Legacy, I am really helping us think about and chart a course forward that is responsibly disruptive, that boasts an interdependency with our collaborative partners, and really focuses on how we cultivate an ecosystem that supports Black and Brown women in particular. We continue to be the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs. I am an entrepreneur as well, a serial entrepreneur. So this is some place, I do this work from a place of passion and a commitment. I like to say that this work is my mandate. So I'm excited for this conversation and really taking actionable pieces and collectively working in this new collaborative to move to move us forward and really think about sustainability so that we're not having to have these very same conversations 15, 20, 30 years from now. And would you like me to popcorn or you will do so?
Fine.
I will popcorn it over to Kelly.
Thanks, Samantha. And thank you to Carrie and SecondMuse for having me. My name is Kelly Gauthier. I'm the president of Rally Assets based in Toronto. So thank you for having me from across the border. Rally is an impact investing advisor and asset manager. So I come to the gender equality space from a perspective of allocating capital. As Carrie said, I'm an entrepreneur and running a business of our own that is focused on how we place capital in the hands of folks that are currently excluded. So from an intersectional lens and thinking about integrating climate issues and other environmental aspects as well. So in our work, we focus very clearly on the who and on who we're placing capital with, but also on the broader systems and the complexity that exists within them. And as Samantha talked about, I think the commonality around this table is probably around disruption, whether it's coming from the nonprofit space within finance and asset management where we sit, or within philanthropy around how we can really agitate to do things differently and get models to change so that we are not, that our daughters are not having the same conversations that we are. So thank you so much for having me. I will pass it to Ayanna.
Hello, thank you, Kelly. Hi, everybody. I'm Ayanna Smith. I'm the Managing Director for Gender Equality and Tech, Get Cities in the DC region. Our goal is to increase the representation of women, trans, non-binary people, and people of color in tech. And in this role, our focus is to increase the amount of funding that goes to women and women tech founders. And we do that by collaborating with local ecosystem players to fill gaps and accelerate the work that's already being done here. And so that's me. I will turn it over to Catherine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Catherine Grill. I'm calling in from the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Neoth. We're the developer of a mobile application, a self-guided application for teen mental health. So often working within the schools to provide support for students and also within healthcare sector as well. My background, I worked as a clinician for a while. I was a clinical researcher, so doing a lot in the adolescent mental health space. I'm also a university professor before I made the jump to entrepreneurship. So I'm very excited to be here today.
Fantastic. Such a breadth of amazing and interesting experience on this call. This is the fun part, right? This is the fun part, getting to hear from all these fantastic humans. So as we dive into some of our findings, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, but a couple key things. So almost 2-to-1, women and men do not agree on the severity of key issues facing America. Women are more concerned than men on things like gender equality, racial equality, and poverty. From a gender equality perspective, women see concerns 35% compared to men at 22%. Racial equity, similar. Women are more concerned with 35% coming in compared to men at 28%. Business climate, saying the business climate is not supportive or is inclusive. Only 19% are saying that it is compared to men at 37%. The list kind of goes on and on, quite frankly. Whenever we looked at the data, there's significant differences. And I think it's important for us to really understand that. So Catherine, I'm going to pop this one over to you first, but in your experience as a leader and as an entrepreneur, where have you seen our systems fail women entrepreneurs? You're in the midst of all this right now. And what are the barriers that all genders are facing that are leading to a less inclusive economy?
Yeah, thanks for that question. We'll talk about this from my perspective as an entrepreneur, and mainly through the lens of raising venture capital, whereas that's just a system where I've seen that there's a lot of bias against women. And I think important to before I jump into specific examples, because Carrie, I know that's what you asked for, just wanted to mention that there are a lot of different types of bias. I actually just did a talk on bias last week with a psychologist. So there's conscious bias, there's unconscious bias. I think it's important for investors to understand that, and would be happy to share that talk later with folks who are wanting to learn about bias. But what I've seen from the venture side is bias throughout the entire process, from sourcing companies through diligence. So I'll give one example of each. Within sourcing companies, I think a lot of investors, venture investors, go on kind of gut feel. And when they're talking to somebody, do they feel like that person is exhibiting confidence? And oftentimes in our society, I think we look at confidence and we attribute it to masculine attributes. So one example of how this happened to me in a venture conversation, when the investor found out that I was the CEO as a woman, I'm also a PhD, so I'm a doctor, said, "Really? But you don't look smart." And just kind of came out showing that they're biased, like, "But you're not a man. I'm surprised that you're the one leading this company." And then, as you can imagine, as you're going on trying to pitch them, how are they going to have respect for you and what you do and the confidence that they should invest in you if they have that bias that you're not going to be a good leader because you're a woman? So I think that that's something that happens a lot in the sourcing. And if they don't have that confidence, you're never even going to make it to the diligence process. And within the diligence process, we also know that there are a lot of issues that become barriers for women. One of the things that we've seen through research is that investors spend more time scrutinizing the financials of a woman-founded company versus a company that's founded by a man. So this is absolutely something that's happened to us. We had an experience with an investor where we're in what's called diligence. They get access to your data room, so they're looking through information about your company. And there's a lot of great information about the team. Kelly, you mentioned this is super important, like who is on the team? What's the product? We work in health, so what are the clinical outcomes? Like there's great information that you need to be understanding before you should decide whether or not you want to invest. Well, this particular group of investors, we can see activity in the data room, spent 0 seconds. 0 seconds looking at anything related to team, product, company, awards. They only looked at our financials. And as we know, the same financial plan from a man with kind of aggressive VC growth, they might say, well, I have confidence that he can achieve those goals. But if it's from a woman, they might say, well, what are the barriers to achieving those? So that's just, I think, one example of where we really saw, well, they're not only looking more at the finances, but they're only looking at the finances and nothing else. And I do want to say, I think this is important to note, the first example was bias that I experienced from a man. The second was actually from a woman investor. So this is a pervasive issue. It's not just men who have bias against women, but it's the entire system that's set up where these behaviors are happening. And it really, it can be a barrier for women to get funding, but I think it's also a problem for these VCs because they're missing out on great companies and great deal flow because of some of the biased behavior that they're engaging in.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grill. Samantha, what are some of the things that you are that you're seeing and that you're helping entrepreneurs with in terms of systemic failures?
Yeah, as Catherine was sharing, I'm kind of just mulling over a recent conversation I had with a young woman who is not from here, but went through a program and was doing her Series A raise. And the conversation, a very notable investment firm shared with her and basically told her she was young, she was a woman, and that she was from a particular country. So this issue is exacerbated even further for women who look like me. I sit in a seat of privilege, power, situational privilege, power, and influence. So I have to speak up and speak out on behalf of Black and Brown women who don't even get a chance to get to the room to go through even the first step in diligence. The folks in the ecosystem who have challenges just accessing the resources that's kind of like bare minimum to just start. And that's where, Walker's Legacy is really focused, is meeting people where they are. The women we serve fundamentally are the backbones of our communities. They're the ones starting businesses as fast as growing paces. And so we have to, it's incumbent upon us as a society, as organizations, private public partnerships, to invest in the resources that these entrepreneurs need so that they can really not just define success for themselves, because success is relative. We also have to do some work debunking the myth of what an entrepreneur looks like, right? I can tell you stories about my grandmother, who is an amazing entrepreneur, and which is where I think I've got my blood from, and what she inherently passed down through my mom. But in America, we have a different definition, a narrative that we like to push out of what an entrepreneur looks like. So there's some work that we have to do around storytelling of what success looks like, what it means to be not just sustainable, but thriving. And how, again, the systems that we operate in, especially when we start talking about capital, but going a little deeper, what capital is appropriate for that business owner? It's not always VC, right? So how are we diversifying the suite of offerings that's really meeting the entrepreneur where she is, where he is, are again, based on how they're identifying, but meeting people where they are so that they can really get their businesses onto the path of legacy. People don't start businesses just for fun. They started because they really want it to be a path for generational wealth building, and so that they can truly pass on a legacy to their families.
Thanks so much. Ayana, zooming in on the tech industry, where are you seeing that the system is failing all genders?
Access to funding, I think, is the biggest fail. To what Samantha spoke on, just number one, helping founders understand what type of funding is best for their business, and then helping them to identify that funding. The funding is there quite often. It's just that people don't know that it exists or how to go about achieving it. And so in my role currently with Get Cities, we are focusing on hosting workshops for founders to learn about access to SBIR funding and other government funding that people don't even know it exists, non-dilutive funding, but also being prepared to, as Dr. Grill pointed out, being prepared to pitch to VCs as well. So yeah, access to funding is one of the biggest gaps that we see. But also, and I want to share this experience that was shared with me by the founder of Street Entrepreneurs. She talked about an accelerator program that they hosted here in the DC region, and it was completely free to all entrepreneurs. And they noticed, even though it was targeted to women, they noticed that there were mostly men signing up for the program. And immediately when they added childcare to the program increased, the cohort increased, women joined the program. It increased by 30% of women when they added childcare in 2 months. And so we know that childcare is not just an issue for working women, but also for entrepreneurs as well.
That's an excellent example. Kelly, I feel like you're a little bit in the hot seat, as everyone is saying. Childcare, yes, but the rest of the three have said, access to capital.
Yep.
So, what are you seeing as true system failures? And I guess the next question might be, what are you doing about them as well?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the experiences of the other panelists are common. And so I think that's the challenge that we're sort of fighting against. I can tell you that when we're sitting on the other side of the table, we start with sort of a cleansing process of who else have you talked to and how have they treated you? Like, let's get it all out of your system so that we can start fresh. Because the first question we ask is, what's important to you, right? To Samantha's point, and Catherine's around, looking at financials, looking at team, like what's important to you as an entrepreneur or even a fund manager, because we operate at different levels of the system. What's important to you? What is it that you need? What is it that you're trying to build? What do you think is the most important part of your pitch? We'll get to the data room, we'll get to all the pieces, but you tell us, this is your passion, this is your investment. Tell us where to look. That's the most important part of it. I think the other piece is that it's really important, and I love that Anna brought up the childcare piece, because it's about the system, right? It's about, you need to unpack this from a systems lens perspective. So it's not just that, Catherine was turned down by males that, didn't appreciate the value in her business. So why are those people making decisions? Why is it consistently men that are usually making decisions around women and non-binary and racialized folks who are then not getting the outcomes that, maybe they deserve? So you have to keep asking why, and then going up a level in that system. So why are those the decision makers? Okay, well, there are barriers to excluded folks being those decision makers. Well, what are those barriers? Those barriers are education, they are access, they are, traditional ideas of financial education, their childcare, their healthcare. So unpacking those pieces and thinking about those pieces, not just the, why is Catherine or Samantha or Ayanna getting funding or not getting funding piece. You have to look at the entire system and be able to play in different pieces in that system, or somebody has to, maybe not these entrepreneurs, but that's part of what we try to unpack when we think about where we invest.
Okay, yeah, there's so much for us to continue to dive into. I have to say, I went from like, yes, go, Kelly, this is amazing. Can you please go educate investors all over the globe on your approach and taking a much more human-centric approach to working initially with entrepreneurs. And then my stomach quickly dropped into like, oh my gosh, there's so much work we have to do. So in general, looking at more of the data, we've been talking about this, but our research findings show that 51% of women say our economy is inclusive, which, that's about half of us say, yep, it's inclusive. Whereas 68% of the men say it's inclusive. So there's definitely a big gap in between how we perceive inclusion. Not surprising, right? Given everything we just said and overall. But I think when we dive into some of the other details is women perceive more sexism in general, and that the economy is inefficient, unfair, under-resourced. In general, women are saying, yeah, the economy has some significant challenges. We've started highlighting a few of the success stories, but I think one of the things that's important to do is recognize we're all on this journey together. And I'm assuming everyone on this call is also working towards this or is going to work towards this because it's important. And so I think having success stories, and not only to help and inspire us, but also kind of lessons learned. What are some of the best practices out there, right? Where are we seeing success? Because it's easy to wallow in how awful things are. And there's definitely plenty of that to go around, but really let's highlight where things are going well, and where our gender is able to equally participate in the economy. So Samantha, it would be fantastic to have you just talk to some of that first, where you're seeing great things, whether it's your organization or someone else that's leading on this charge, or other organizations.
Yeah, so the percentages and the representation, it's going to vary again when you look at that subset of 51% women. If you're to dig a little deeper and focus on Black and Brown women, then that percentage shrinks even more. But the success stories, I'm a storyteller, and so that's part of what we're doing at Walker's Legacy as well, is highlighting the success stories, because representation matters. I was on a call with someone in the administration this morning, and we talked a lot about South Carolina. And I noted my time and work in Bamberg County, South Carolina, which for a long time had not one single healthcare facility. But as we're thinking about innovation and meeting people where they are, we also have to think about the areas that are not as robust, right? And where these stories can be captured and told, so that the representation and the stories and the narratives of, oh, I had an idea, I was able to conceive it and birth it, and the infrastructure, the systems I had in place to support me. So we're seeing a lot happening in different ecosystems. There are a lot of collectives and collaboratives coming together. Again, I think there's a recognition, especially in the Black community, that the cavalry is not coming, because we are the cavalry. We are the people that we've been waiting on, but this also includes the critical allies who may not look like us, really thinking strategically about how we come together, identify the gaps in the systems, and push those stories out to encourage more actors in the space to have this urgent interdependency, so we can forget chipping away. Let's just deconstruct the whole truncated system. There's an unapologetic boldness that I see happening, especially among women leaders of all colors. And there's more cross-pollination and cross-collaboration happening in the space where we're having those positive outcomes. We are seeing albeit slow, there's more funding going towards women of color. But again, it's not fast enough. So if we think that such amazing success is already happening in the Brown and Black communities, and women as a whole, women continue to start and launch businesses, what if we just really triple down on our investments and equip women with and men with the tools and resources? Entrepreneurship, ingenuity, innovation, as the co-founder of Halcyon like to say, are the twin engines that fuel the American economy. This is an urgent need that we have to think about what America looks like 20 years from now, 50 years from now. We're completely reliant on the gall, the audacity of entrepreneurs. So I think for each of us, continuing to tell these stories and pushing our colleagues and friends to highlight the success stories, have more representative stories told, so that folks can really feel inspired to not just launch something, but understand that there is a path and an ecosystem, and there are people, resources, organizations ready to support this ingenuity. Again, I don't want to be doing this forever. I want to be put out of business. And I think my colleagues would be saying the same. So what is it that we need to be doing? Again, I'll use these two words, to be super responsibly disruptive.
I love that. There was so many genius nuggets in there. That's incredibly responsive, disruptive, so many other things. But Ayanna, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing, and I don't mean to keep drilling down on the childcare thing, but it's also important, to Samantha's point, to think about why Black and brown women become entrepreneurs in the first place. And one of the main reasons why is out of the necessity for flexibility in their schedules to be caregivers. So the importance of making a greater investment in childcare and elder care is also important. But that is one of the main reasons why Black and brown women become entrepreneurs in the first place.
I think it's important to us, to Ayana's point, for us to understand culture, right? There are cultural nuances that fuel this desire for entrepreneurship. And it singularly, oftentimes, it's also for Black and brown women, it's an escape from what happens in corporate America. The racism, the sexism, all the isms, right? Like, it's just, I can't deal with anymore. Let me take a bet on myself. And because there's this inherent and innate belief that, look, I'm going to bet on me and I can do this because I've done it in this big structure before. So let me just do it. So how do we, again, put systems in place, support systems in place, and look at the holistic view of, and the holistic journey of entrepreneurship? What are the tools and resources that really will best equip these individuals to not just launch businesses, but have them be sustainable and thriving? And if I'm okay knowing that my kids are safe, or my mom who is in my care, or my dad, that psychological freedom allows then for us to be even more innovative, which propels us to grow our companies, which turns into more jobs, which really, again, continues to fuel our holistic economies.
Definitely. Where are we seeing, Kelly, you were going to jump in, some success stories, right? I think, like,
Samantha was talking about, she's talking about attacking this from the other end of the system, right? So, a flight away from corporate practice because conditions have been so terrible and inequitable there, but we still need to take it from both sides, right? So unpaid labor is, and domestic inequality are huge problems that contribute to not just the growth of entrepreneurship, but overall inequality, because we need to fix what is happening in large corporations globally, not just in the US, right? Around the way that folks are treated, to create options for, racialized and, gender and non-binary folks across the spectrum. So if you want to be in a corporation and that's where you want to, blaze your path, great, that is an option and a fair and sustainable option for you. And that it isn't this path to entrepreneurship because of, but that is also a sustainable path for you. Right. And so attacking these issues in all types of structures with an eye onto what are the root causes for why these things are happening. Sorry, I just didn't want to let that point go. It's
so yeah, it's such a key issue.
Can I just jump in also and say, you asked for success stories, and I was thinking about all of the success stories of women entrepreneurs that I know, but honestly, those don't come without sacrifice. And of course, there's nothing in life that you're successful at without sacrifice, but women make greater sacrifices, and women entrepreneurs, to be successful. And so those success stories do exist, but they don't exist without the sacrifice of childcare, healthcare, financial stability. And so those key issues that are systemic are very important to consider when we talk about, it's this holistic picture of a woman who's successful as an entrepreneur. She didn't get there easily. That's a fact, without sacrificing in one of these key areas.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. Catherine, do you have some, like, whether it's individual success stories or system success stories, right? Or where you see and feel things going well? How about, I think it's more of like,
absolutely.
hey, this actually felt good, and it's supportive, it's resourceful. Yes, right? Where we go out in the world and we're like, fantastic. This is great.
This goes back, Ayana, to something that you said before, so I might ask you to jump in on this, but I'm just thinking of, and thank you all the panelists for kind of looking at this from a holistic view, because I think that's so important. And I'm going to jump into like one specific example of where I felt the funding was more successful. So Anna, you mentioned the SBIR funding, and I used to work in NIH research, so government funding, and that process is very different from VC funding, where there's oftentimes blinded reviews. So you might not know who the reviewer is, they might not know who you are, they would know your credentials, but they might not know things like, you know, race and gender, to try to eliminate bias there. And there's also a whole scoring card that comes up, so it's very objective, and you get that information back and you get feedback as to, you know, why your funding proposal was successful or not successful. So that is an area, you know, before becoming an entrepreneur, now my company is VC funded, where I spent a lot of time doing NIH research. And yeah, I was curious, maybe Anna, if you could bring up a little bit more about the SBIR funding for other entrepreneurs on the call, as that might be a viable source of funding.
Dr. Grill, I cannot. I don't know a ton about SBIR funding, which is why, and just the feedback that we've gotten from other founders is that they don't either, that they've tried the process and it was so cumbersome after a few times that they stopped trying. And that's why we realized there was a need to put together this series of workshops that we're doing at Get Cities for founders to learn about SBIR funding, have office hours with an expert, but then also have office hours with someone who has served as a reviewer as well. So I'm in the process of learning about it as well, as we hope to expose other women to this funding opportunity. But what I do know is that you know there's an opportunity to raise anywhere between $100,000 and $2.5 million of non-dilutive funding, and that's a huge opportunity that people should know about and take advantage of.
And in addition to SBIR, we have to think about the, you know, government contracting. It's a whole big, like, it seems so monstrous, like it's like we can't attack it, but it's the one thing, it's that lever that we can pull, that opportunity that we can unlock, that takes us from like just surviving as a business to actually thriving. And every single entrepreneur should be thinking about where their expertise and where their business can be plugged in as a government contractor. Yes, the process to secure, whether you're state MBE or federal MBE or 8A, it does take time, it does take some investments, but it is such a critical opportunity. We need to be thinking about the Export-Import Bank of America, like what role they play. There's a significant commitment from Chairwoman Rita Jo Lewis, who's the first Black woman appointed by President Joe Biden to be to lead export-import, and so there's a focus on really helping entrepreneurs, especially Black and Brown entrepreneurs, to think about the role of EXIM. So again, it's having these conversations, sharing the resources freely, having conversations where we can see our businesses as, you know, beyond the state border, beyond the nation's border. If you have a website and you're an entrepreneur and you have a product or service that can be offered anywhere in the world, you should be thinking about exporting and importing. Also think about the SBA office, your local SBA office, how you can access support in that way. That's what they're there for. That's why they're installed. For us at Walker's Legacy, we do have a business center that is funded and supported by the Minority Business Development Agency under the United States Department of Commerce. We're essentially fueling and funneling up into the president's agenda to ensure that not just the resources, you know, the technical assistance, but what are the resources, the capital resources, the social network, right? We know our networks are a net worth. So how are we using that to amplify what we do? And don't be shy if you're an entrepreneur, you've got a day job and you're trying to build this thing on the side, especially women. We get a little shy talking about that. I'm an entrepreneur for 16 years running a restaurant, and I've still had a successful career. That is my success. That's how I define my success. Don't get mired in other people's definition of success. Define it the way you want, whether it's for today or how you want it to be 5, 10 years from now.
Great, great. Kelly, are you seeing other ways? So you've given a couple of, examples, but are you seeing other ways that you are employing or other investors are to make our, our economy more inclusive? Like true success stories or best practices. I think for other things that people can actually practically say that is fantastic, and I'm gonna go off and work on it. I know in Get Cities we do a lot of work in the cities that we're working with with investors.
Yeah.
But how do we do this broadly?
So I think I would let's split it into for entrepreneurs that are seeking capital. So in addition to the government opportunities that are looking for private capital, know first of all that we exist. There are impact investors out there. There are folks that will align with your enthusiasm, your mission, and your vision, and that will meet you where you're at. So if folks are not giving you that respect and they are not treating you that way, move on and find the folks that, find your people, right? And it's no different than what I tell my school-age children. If somebody's being a jerk to you, leave, move on, find the right people. And it's exactly the same. And it's not easy. And I'm not suggesting in any way that it is, or that there is, zillions of dollars out there and everybody gets it, because clearly that's not our lived experience. That's not why we're all having this conversation. But I do want to give you some hope that there are folks out there that get it, and there are opportunities to do that. So find those people. So for the capital allocator side of things, and maybe a lens too for entrepreneurs to think through, the way that we look at it, and that other impact investors do who are doing this well, is through a few different pieces. So who is it that you're investing into? So to Catherine's original point, the first thing you should be looking at is team, not the last thing. Who is it that you're investing into? And you may have a strategy to invest into folks that have been traditionally excluded from receiving capital. That might be your strategy. But from our perspective, that can't be the only strategy. So you need to think about not just who you're investing into, but what is it they're doing? What is the business? What is the fund manager? What are they trying to create? Are they working in childcare? Are they thinking about the different systemic impacts that affect marginalized and excluded folks? Because it's not just the who is one part of the solution, but it's also the what. It's what folks are doing and who benefits from that activity. And then the last part is around the how. So think about how this process as an entrepreneur, feels for you, and the things that are valued. And for capital allocators, do it differently. You don't need to use the same processes and the same risk models and the same products that capital markets have been using for 100 years. Like, they don't work. Like, that's the main message, is they don't work. They don't value the right things. The economy is changing. The markets are changing. The things that, folks appreciate and value and understand are changing. When I started my work in this career, 20 years ago, I was told repeatedly that environmental risk had no financial value. Repeatedly, by large pension plans, by large investors. And at the same time that BP is dumping oil into the Gulf of Mexico and their stock is tanking. And the same folks were saying there's no connection between environmental risk and financial value. And that's just fundamentally untrue. It was untrue 20 years ago. Capital markets folks are kind of getting it now that it's untrue. And it's no different around diversity, inclusion, and other pieces. So there's a much greater awareness. But look for folks that are doing things differently. We don't look for traditional education. We don't look for track record in the way that, traditional investors do. We look for different markers of success because we're looking at investments in a very different way. And so whether you're sitting on the allocation side of the table, think differently about how you do your job. And if you're receiving capital, then find the people that are asking the right questions, because in the long term, they're going to be the right partner for you as well, right? It's not a singular transaction. Entrepreneurs take capital, but then you're stuck with that relationship for a long time. And so if it doesn't feel good at the beginning, it's sure not going to feel good in year 3, year 5, and year 10. So find those right partners. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I think everything that everyone has said is super, super helpful. I think I want to turn it over to the group for questions. I have more questions if we don't have some from our audience, but I think one of the key things that I heard Samantha kind of kicked this off, and then I think it's a theme that we've been hearing, is wherever you're coming from, right? Whatever your position you're coming from, be intentional, right? Recognize this and be intentional, whether it's representation, or whether it is saying, look, we have to think about how we share our resources differently, how we share information. I think one of the key things here is raise your awareness, raise your intentionality around it, right? And be bold, right, in doing so, because I think it's easy to be like, oh yeah, well, we tried and that didn't work. So I think it's be incredibly intentional. Yes, we've got time for questions. We can all keep talking about this for a long time, but I'd love to get some questions from the audience.
While we wait on questions, just to underscore Kelly's sharing of it's not working, there are other ways that we can de-risk having intimate relationships with accelerators and incubators who are getting to know these founders in a really unique way and spending time with them. That is also a marker of de-risking. So I think we need to be more open and not follow the traditional model. And I know I'm still confident, and Kelly, you're part of that confidence. Like, we will see more, but it's still moving way too slow. And we've just got to keep challenging the people and the when we're in touch with funders or VCs, or we're sitting on angel group meetings, like, let's just continue to speak up and speak out.
And Samantha, to that point, I definitely don't want to minimize the importance of social capital. That is the way men get things done. And so definitely building your social capital and leveraging your social capital to help other women and other represented founders is very important. I mean, just how quick things can get done just by picking up the telephone sometimes. And so leveraging your own social capital to help the next woman is to me very, very essential in this process.
Yeah. What does that actually look like? What do you say? I mean, I think these are I know this feels like really nuts and bolts, but I'd love to hear Ayanna, Samantha, anyone, like, what does it really look like to use our voice?
I picked up the phone and called Samantha and said, hey, we have a slot on this panel. And we'd love to hear from you. And we would love to hear about the work you're doing at Walker's Legacy. And now everyone that's been on this call and everyone that will hear this call will have, that didn't know that Walker's Legacy exists, will have access to the programming and the funding that they provide. And so it's just that simple. Yeah. That's
great. Anyone else?
I think so, particularly here in Canada, we added to the conversation on inequality is reconciliation and Indigenous voices. And so that's a very strong theme here, as it is in the US. And so I think one of the things that has come up for us too is a respectful balance in those asks of how much we're asking folks, because it does tag into the same idea of unpaid work. Women will often say yes more than they will say no. They will do things for free. They will undervalue their contribution, their participation. And so it's this incredibly tricky balance. So as Ayanna says, Samantha can be here and she can talk about what she does, and that creates opportunity for other people. And that's an important part of the ecosystem. But we also all undervalue ourselves fundamentally, and we don't know where to draw those lines always. And so when those asks continue to come, whether it's to underrepresented groups or just folks that have been structurally excluded in the past, quite often there's a lot more asking and a lot less reciprocity in terms of what we're going to get out of it. And so it's a really important dynamic within exclusion and equity that we need to be mindful of also.
Yeah, I'll jump on that. Catherine, then I'll just jump in, and then Catherine, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's so key. I think one of the things that someone has told me, and it works really well, is pass the baton, kind of to like what you said, Ayanna, in terms of, yeah, I would love to help you, but I think there's other people as well. Because I think oftentimes when you get in these kind of positions and everyone's like, I'm going to have that one woman of color come speak or whatever, right? And talk to it. It's saying, nope, there's a whole, I've got some other amazing people that I know that can also represent this. So I think that's a very simple best practice. I'll just say in the past couple of weeks, one of the ways that I've actually just used my voice and used my social capital is flagging things. I've been like, hey, men, this is an amazing panel. This is something that's happening during the UN General Assembly. It's a big side event. And I'm like, that's fantastic. This is an amazing topic. Great job. these are all men speakers. What's going on here? And they're like, we know, we're trying to get this. Thank you for calling this out. But I think it's continually using your voice and using, using those relationships that you have to call out inequities and representation. And I think never underestimate those things. So anyway, Catherine, jump on in.
So perfect segue to what I wanted to talk about, because, just calling things out, Carrie, like you mentioned, and Kelly, before you were talking about setting boundaries, and I think this is something that I, pose a question to the group, like for their advice. It's something that I've had a hard time with, because sometimes you have those experiences like I had, or Samantha, you were talking about one of the entrepreneurs you work with, and they were being told, they weren't going to be invested in because of who they were with their racial identity and gender identity. And when something like that happens, it's clearly like inappropriate. It takes you back. And then as an entrepreneur, you're kind of like, well, what do I do here? I want to call this out. And often I found as a young woman, when I do call that out, the reaction that I get from funders is defensiveness and anger. And this kind of, Ayana, goes into what you were saying, like the social capital is so important. But what happens when you do try to respectfully call that out, and then, maybe people are kind of talking about you and, oh, this person, because they don't like being called out. So I'm just curious to hear from the group, especially those of you on the kind of the funding side and supporting entrepreneurs. What do you recommend in that situation when they are being treated inappropriately? How do you respectfully draw those boundaries with investors?
There's also a question from Rachel that ties into this kind of thematic line. So we're going to find those folks who are going to push back, and they're going to push back because it's their norm, it's routinized, it's habitual. But we have to, again, just have this understanding that the seat that we often sit in of either inherent or situational privilege. And let me just give you a brief description of what it is. So I have 3 white women colleagues on this panel. There's some inherent privilege that you boast simply because you are white. Ayana and I identify as Black women. We have situational privilege because we are educated, we've got social capital, we've got, all these other things to add. And so it really is incumbent upon folks who are in these seats to say, you know what, I'm going to have the audacity to speak up and speak out, but also model. How are we modeling what we want to see? And just kind of tying back into to Rachel, she specifically said, there's a sense of powerlessness among my entrepreneurial colleagues and clients who identify as women. They're giving up and getting traditional jobs. I believe the mental health of diverse founders is constantly being negatively impacted by the many dead ends and the experience, which is causing a brain drain on innovation. So a lot of that is true, and which is why we have to focus and have a holistic approach on an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship is a very lonely space, which is why the communities are so important. Kelly talked about finding your people. We have to find tribes, but we also have to make sure that we're being very open with our invitations to folks who need to find a tribe. Sometimes we're the ones that are going to have to extend the invitation because people have there's some trauma and PTSD from trying to insert ourselves into spaces. We're going to have to say, here, there's a space at the table. I'm making the space at the table. Come join me. So how do we see ourselves as champions? How do we encourage others to be champions so that we are again, making the space for a holistic entrepreneur? Sometimes we're going to have to be not just the business advisor, but we're going to have to be that listening person to the personal stuff as well, because it all ties into one's ability to successfully move their business from just surviving, just existing to past surviving and thriving.
I was going to share, so I love that, Samantha, and I think it's so important to be able to create those spaces. And, Catherine started off talking about your bias and understanding your biases, and it's also understanding your privilege. And and being comfortable talking about it, right? So I think there's so many barriers even there around having the comfort to be able to talk about your privilege and relative to somebody else's. I'll share in the chat a link to an article. So this is about an equity raise. And so the question Carrie asked was around how do we use our platforms? How do we use our voice? And this is a founder of a sustainable and body inclusive underwear brand called Knix. She raised 53 million in a venture round while she was 8 months pregnant. She signed it when she was 8 months pregnant. And so she was really clear within her own team and within their raise strategy that anybody that gave her any shit for being pregnant or being a woman CEO was out. And she was going to continue, and I've heard her speak about this, and she was going to continue to prioritize that. And so they got very close on term sheets with one investor, and it kind of got down to the final wire. And finally, the VC said, well, they, meaning she and her fetus, they will need to be replaced. That's our final term, right? After months of negotiating this. And, you can imagine as founders, the emotional and time experience of having put all this time into this. And so she, bravely, stupidly walked away from the deal and took a bunch more time and was able to then go, to another party and close the deal. And to Samantha's point, there's privilege in that position fundamentally, but the position of leading with values and, creating your tribe, I think is a privilege in of itself that we haven't allowed ourselves to have. This isn't that's not a historical position, right? Women a decade, 2 decades ago didn't have that privilege of leading with values and saying, I'm going to walk away from this money because I believe that I'll be able to find, the next piece of capital. So anyway, I put the article in the chat. It's a really interesting story to think about.
There's so much richness here. We could keep going and going, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So thank you all for sharing this time with us. And thank you for doing the work that you do.